All right, the multiplication of the loaves. We're going to be looking at tonight. Greetings, my name is Todd, Philosopher King. So, Mark chapter 6 through 8. It's got the two great feeding miracles. Got the one of the two sea crossing rescue scenes where Jesus has to rescue the 12. They can't deal with the winds at sea. In this case, Jesus is going to walk on water. Very impressive. And the great mystery here, the 11 of the Pharisees and Herod, which is going to come later. And we're going to look at all this. And I was first introduced to the mysteries of this section, Gospel of Mark, by Pierre Grimes, the recently departed Golden West College philosophy professor. Brilliant man, and had a great influence on me in a number of ways. And passed in early June. And since then, I've been awakening from my slumber. I haven't been doing much in terms of philosophical research this year, last year and a half or so. And I've been fired up. He was a guy that really lit a fire in me for philosophy and for understanding old books. These old books, people, they really underestimate what's going on in books like the Gospel of Mark, Homer's great epics, the Iliad and the Odyssey, Plato's dialogues, Parmenides' poem, and many others. Pierre used to say at Golden West, he teaches how to read. That's mainly what I do, is teach people how to read. And if you know how to read, if you're good at that game, if you know what's going on with these texts, how to get into them, they're a lot of fun. There's a lot more to them than meets the eye. And Gospel of Mark is, for those of you who are not familiar, Mark is one of the four Gospels. They're called Good News Gospels in the New Testament. They're biographies of Jesus, tell about his life, times, and death, and in some cases his resurrection appearances. Mark has no resurrection appearances. Interesting, the original copy of Mark. If you check your footnotes in your Bibles, if you don't believe me, the original copy's end at the tomb. So, what's Mark all about? What's going on? What am I doing here? Well, Mark presents Jesus as a teacher of esoteric parables. Tells parables like parable of the sower. The sower sows the seeds. They land on different kinds of soil, and they grow. They fail to grow unless they're on good soil, and their failure reflects different types of bad soil. For example, some fall on the path where they don't take root at all. Birds come down and take them away. Some fall on rocky soil. They grow for a little while, but the sun comes and they wither. And some fall on thorny soil. They grow for a little while. Then thorns come and choke the seed, and they produce no fruit. And then some fall on good soil, and those are the ones that produce fruit. Now, Jesus explains this parable in private to his disciples and a few others around him. And it's like, really, for everybody outside, they're not going to understand. Because, according to understand the parable of the sower, you have to understand a set of matching terms that you might not know. Like the birds are Satan. It turns out the birds that come and devour the seed that land on the path, that's Satan. Whoa, nobody would guess that. The sun is trouble or persecution, turns out, that comes, and then the seed that grows, and the rocky soils, because it's shallow, it spreads up, and it withers at the sight of the sun, trouble, persecution. Yeah, you might kind of guess that, probably not. Thorny soil turns out to be desires and cares of this world. You might associate that with thorns, especially if you're into Philo. He does that. He interprets the thorns somewhat similarly. So that one's not so hard, but Satan would be tough. But in any case, Jesus explains all these to the disciples, and they're able to, understand the parable because he gives them these terms to a greater degree than they would otherwise. So he's a teacher of parables, right? That's his game, right? Doesn't make it easy. Gives people parables and that you'd say uh, entice the mind into thinking actively, trying to. What's he talking about? And you get a partial understanding. You don't get the whole thing, but it's not just shoveling you through a knowledge. He's not just preaching at you, right? Parables. You see these throughout the New Testament, and Mark, instead of giving you a bunch of parables, they really emphasize that Jesus is a teacher of parables. And what happens here, the feeding of the 5,000, feeding of the 4,000, is that he treats the miracles as parables in his teaching of the 12, and in terms of Mark's presentation to the reader, right? So we're going to get into that. It's going to be fun. Get my trusty marker here. Mark chapter 6. Jesus begins with Jesus sending out the 12 on a missionary journey, right? Sends out the 12 to go out 2 by 2, and they preach the gospel. Tell people they should repent, and they heal people. They're rubbing oil on people's head and healing people, exorcising demons, presumably other stuff. Goes really well, right? Success. I guess they get 3 stars, right? Really so successful, in fact, that Herod hears of it. King Herod, oops, forgot the H. Circle the whole name here. Herod. He's the ruler in the area, ruler in northern Galilee. northern Palestine, that area. He's in charge. Not the King Herod that kill all the babies or whatever. Matthew. Herod here's of this activity. Now, before Jesus sent out the 12, he'd been doing this thing for 4 chapters, and Herod hadn't heard of it. Sends out the 12, makes a splash, and now he has heard of it, right? That's what a big deal it is. And Mark conveys to his reader that it was a big deal simply by saying, hey, Herod heard of it, right? King heard of it. It's a big deal, right? This thing's blowing up. Herod heard of it. And now what you have here, the reason I have a bracket here, this right here is called a Markan sandwich. Right? It's a sandwich. Fancy scholarly term for it is an intercalatation. And what it is, introduce a story. Jesus sends out the 12, right? And then you break off to another story here. In this case, the story of Herod and John the Baptist. Then you go back and you resume the original story, right? And what this invites you to do, right, is to consider these stories in light of each other, right? Like, what's going on? Why this in the middle? What's he trying to, signify? Famous example of this is that when Jesus cleanses the temple, throws all the money changers out and makes a big scene. But before that, he curses a fig tree, goes to get fruit from it, doesn't get any, and then curses it. And then he goes in the temple, does what he does, and then after he leaves the temple, the next morning they see the fig tree and it's withered. Right, and then you have something to say afterwards, a really important teaching, right? And you're invited to compare what he did with the fig tree with the temple, and then compare this teaching, his post-temple cleansing teaching, right? And you think about it, he does just spoon feed it to you, and you're like, what's going on here? That's the Markan sandwich, and some sandwiches are easier to consume than others, right? It's tempting to just take the sandwich open-faced. Maybe leave out this and just consider this, and then leave this. No, you gotta eat the whole sandwich. What's he doing here with the sandwich? We're gonna explore that, and it's an interesting answer, maybe. By the way, if you don't want too many answers, stop watching. I'm gonna give you way more answers than Pierre ever gave me. Pierre was never generous in terms of answers, just questions on this, more so than just about any other topic that he would lecture on. From the books that we studied, similar with the studies in Book Center of the Republic, he, give little hints, and then you got to figure it out on your own. And he's really stingy, and even more so with this. You make a big deal of it, you got to figure it out. And I don't know what he thinks of what I did here, but you'll see. It's pretty good. It works. And Pierre's there, and trust me, I'm just scratching the surface of the meaning here. I'm not killing the whole mystery. However, if you want to figure this stuff out on your own without just being told how it works right now, stop the video, make a comment. We'll exchange emails, and I'll send you some questions that help maybe like hit you towards it, and so you can see it without learn too much too fast. Because I'm being really generous. This is compared to Pierre, but sometimes it's important to provide a demonstration of power and magic in order to really get people excited about this stuff. Maybe show off my knowledge a little bit. You trust me, want to come back for more. And so here we go. We're going into this. Ready? Jesus sends out the 12. All right. Goes well. King Herod. Here's the king. Not the king. Tetrarch Herod. Ruler Herod. Here's a bit. He, turns out, had killed John the Baptist. He'd had him beheaded. And this little, breakaway here, the middle of the sandwich, tells the whole story of Herod and John the Baptist. Herod had him beheaded because he was having like a birthday party. They had this little girl dancing for him and his friends. Herod's so impressed that he offers her anything up to half his kingdom. She doesn't know what to ask for, so she goes and asks Herod's wife, I think her mom, or I don't know, it's Herod's daughter, stepdaughter, niece. It's different people say different things, but it's not good. he's not impressed with the young girl's dance. In any case, she, the mom, the Herodias, Herod's wife, says, yeah, give me John the Baptist's head. She's mad at John the Baptist because he criticized their marriage, because she had been married to Herod's brother. And Herod had arrested John, but he'd actually kept him safe and kind of liked John. The text said he did many things when he heard John talk, right? Tried to protect him, keep him safe. But he made an oath to give this little girl up to half his kingdom. Said she was John the Baptist's head. He goes through with it. Rash oaths are a real problem in the Bible too. Check the book of Judges on that score. Don't make a rash oath. And Herod does so. And all his other problems. He ends up beheading John the Baptist. Right? And so as a result, he hears about this activity Herod does. And people have different theories around him. They're like, hey, it's Elijah, or maybe it's John the Baptist back from the dead. And Herod's like, yeah, it's John the Baptist is back from the dead. John, whom I'm killed, is risen from the dead. All right, that's what Herod thinks. It's this. All right, John the Baptist, risen from the dead. Now, how literal he meant risen from the dead, or how he meant it, I don't think he meant like body risen from the dead. I don't know if he meant like his soul means alive, or just meant like in some ominous way. His spirit was, animating this new thriving ministry. Not sure, but in any case, he attributes it to John the Baptist, risen from the dead. Right? That's what Herod thinks. And also worth of note in this section is John the Baptist's disciples says at the end, they recover his body. They go and they get his body, John's body. So I was going to draw a dead body and then get it, but you get the point. Not needed. And that contrasts, of course, with Jesus' own disciples fleeing the scene at his death, and they don't recover his body. They're out of town, and maybe it's a suggestion that John's disciples were, better trained than Jesus is. Kind of brutal. Jesus, he's good. Jesus is good, he's a good teacher, teaches the parables, but with the 12, he's got problems, as we can see here. And so, final part of the sandwich here, the bottom half here, 12 return. And this is where things get really interesting. 12 return, and Jesus suggests they go out to the desert and get away. They hadn't had time to eat. They're tired, right? Long trip, no food. They want to go. Let's go out to the middle of the desert, and we'll get away. We'll eat, and you tell me everything you've done. And they're like, yeah, let's do that, So there they go. They go, right? Here they go. Going out to the middle of the desert. Right, all right. Guess what happens? 5,000 people beat them there, right? 5,000 people there waiting for him, right? And Jesus sees these people waiting for him. I think we got word where they were going, beat them there. And he's amazed. It's like he's like, wow, and he teaches them all day long. He teaches them many things. Goes on all day. The 12, on the other hand, when it's getting late, they maybe show their cards a little bit because they go to Jesus and they say, hey, hours late, send them away so they can buy themselves something to eat. And Jesus responds by saying, "You give them something to eat." And they're like, "What do you want us to get 200 denarii and go buy food, go buy bread?" And he's like, "No." That they probably didn't have 200 denarii. It's probably a sarcastic comment. And scholars debate this conversation of whether the disciples really just cared about the people, being hungry. But these people hadn't gone days without eating, and they send them away. It doesn't sound good. And then what happens? More evidence for the negative reading comes as follows. Jesus tells them, "You give them something to eat." And they respond, "Let's go buy them bread." He's like, "No. What do you got? What do you got to eat here?" 5 loaves, 2 fish. It's like, all right, what we're going to do? We put everybody in rows of 50s and 100s, 5,000 people, line them up on the green grass, we're told. Green grass. Why is it grass green? Trying to tell us about the location, nice weather, fertile ground, right? Green grass. They sit on the green grass. And what he does, Jesus, right, takes the loaves, puts them before the 12, and then the 12 give them to the 5,000, right? And goes over pretty well. Nicely done, fellas. Ha. And what happens? Everybody's fed. Jesus actually, by the way, he distributes the fish himself to the crowd. All right, he divides it among the fish among them all. He says, sort of esoteric reason for that. I'm not going to tell you. Figure it out yourself. Anyway, 5,000 feeds the 5,000, and then there's leftover. There's 12 baskets of broken pieces of the fish, and then bread, crumbs. 12 baskets of crumbs. This word for baskets is a word used a basket that was commonly used in Jewish culture at the time. It's become interesting because we're going to see a different word for basket used down here. Hold that thought for later. So it goes well. 12 baskets of leftovers, 1 for each disciple. We get these like numbers, 5 and 12. All right. Anyway, 2 fish. Very interesting. Successful miracle. Jesus, after that, sends the 12 to Bethsaida to sail this boat across the sea to Bethsaida. And he goes to a mountain, gets rid of the crowd, and goes up to a mountain to pray. And now we get the sea crossing. These guys are struggling at the oars, right? And this word for struggling at the oars, it's the same word used for torture when the legion demon earlier in when Jesus exorcises a demon that says, "We are many, a legion," and he exorcises them. And they ask Jesus, "Oh, you're Jesus Nazareth, you're going to torture us, And that torture, they're afraid of being tortured. That's what's happening here. Torture. It's torturing at the oars, right? Facing the wind, right? And there's a good deep reason to think the wind and the waves and the sea is symbolic of evil spirits, right? There's this, this tradition in the Old Testament with Leviathan, Behemoth, the sea monsters, is representing the forces of evil, right? And so in both of the sea crossing narratives, the disciples are struggling, symbolic of this struggle against evil, and Jesus can handle it. They cannot. They don't do well. They're struggling with the wind. So Jesus sees it. He's on the shore. He's like watching and sees him struggling against the wind, and his heart goes out to him. And so he walks on the water to them. Right? He walks on the water, and he intends to pass him by. The text says he intends to pass him by, walking on the water. Right? And there's debate over what this means. The most plausible explanation, just tell you right out, because he wanted to inspire them. It's like an appearance. He's walking on the water. He's had a ghost-like appearance. It's like and it parallels like the appearance of the glory of the Lord in the Old Testament, where it's a appearance / rescue scene. Lead them away, right? And I should have had the passages ready for that next time. Put them in the comments. But yeah, he wants to pass them by. He wants to lead them. Anyway, it doesn't work because they see him, his ghost-like appearance, walking on water, and they freak out. They think he's a ghost, and they're afraid, terrified. And Jesus is like, no, no, no. And he goes towards him. He says, take heart. It is I, or I am technically, ego in the Greek. And this means, it is I identify myself. But it also is the same words that the God of Israel uses to refer to himself in the book of Exodus. When it says, tell them I am sent me to Moses. So there could be he's merged here. He's like one with the God of Israel. I am. That explains his spirit-like appearance. You can play those interpretations. In any case, after identifying himself, he gets in the boat with them, and as soon as he does, the wind dies down. And they're amazed. And what the author says here, he explains the disciples' behavior in this whole debacle where Jesus has to come rescue them. Says that they did not understand about. Wish I had Pierre Grimes' cursive, I'll tell you that. The loaves. They didn't understand about the loaves. Right? If they didn't understand about the loaves, maybe they would have not needed Jesus to rescue them. But that's not all he says. It's Mark 6:52. Key passage. Huge passage. Maybe the most important passage ever written. Key passage in Mark. They did not understand the loaves, for their hearts were hardened. My hearts look like butts, but And hardened hearts look like butts. So this is accurate drawing right here. Don't think I can't draw a real heart. So yeah, Mark 6:52, not a G, that's a 6. Explains one of the disciples' horrible performance at sea. They did not understand the loaves, for their hearts were hardened. So, had they understood about the loaves, presumably they would have dealt with the wind, or at the very least, when Jesus came to rescue them, instead of being scared shitless, they would have been inspired and followed his lead and made it. Instead, they're scared of the rescuer, right? And then he be rescued. Jesus has to get in the boat with them before the wind calms down. And but if they understood about the loaves, then that would have been necessary, okay? Or at least some of it wouldn't have been necessary. So there's that. So that's what do they understand about the loaves, right? Well, question number one. Question number two. Their hearts were hard. When did that happen? Why are their hearts hard? When and why? I want to know. Because if their hearts were hardened here when Jesus sent them out on this wildly successful missionary journey that goes so well, Herod hears of it and starts seeing the ghost of John the Baptist in his dreams, perhaps, risen from the dead. That doesn't make sense. And Jesus knows what's going on in people's hearts. He perceives it in his spirit. And several times he reads these guys' minds left and right. Doesn't make sense. So no. The heart's not hardened here, right? When they get back, however, we saw, there's this scene where they look like they're resentful of the crowd, right? Right? They send them away, so they can buy themselves something to eat, right? Let them go spend some money at Winter Schnitzel and, So, this right here, Jesus tries to make it, they turn this into a teachable moment, right? By giving them this role and this miracle. So they're supposed to learn something about the loaves, right? So, what are they supposed to understand? This teachable moment right here fails because their hearts are hard and they don't get the lesson, right? Their hearts are hardened by the presence of the crowd and the fallout from the missionary journey. They're tired, they're hungry, and they become little sourpusses when Jesus gives their attention to these 5,000 people who interrupted their R&R, where they were going to be able to get more personal, alone time with their guy, their teacher, eat, relax, and in doing so, maybe a little bit show themselves to be a little like Herod and his buddies, who also were dining and wanted to relax, be entertained. Now, leaven, it's a tiny piece that you put in the bread that makes it grows over time, right? So it's not going to be a big thing, right? So I submit to you, these guys, they show a little bit leaven of Herod. And as we're going to see, leaven of the Pharisees, we'll get to that soon enough. So that it completes the sandwich. We got a sandwich here. All right, puts this bottom piece of the bread down here to draw a comparison, right, between the 12, right, Herod, right, and these guys, and then you make the contrast between John the Baptist's disciples who come and get his body, right, with these guys who don't, and the fallout. There's a lot of evidence here, man. These guys, the fallout for the missionary journey, these guys have a decline, right? It's not good for them, right? So what's the warning? Right? Missionaries, like leaders of the burgeoning Christian community, sending out these young missionaries that spread the church, right? Young and experienced. Or these guys were like fishermen and stuff, right? Only two of them came from a wealthy family, apparently. And, this is the kind of people that were spreading early Christianity at times, I'm sure. And it turns out that the purported author of the Gospel of Mark, John Mark, was in Mark the Evangelist. He was a missionary guy, according to the book of Acts. He was accompanied, Paul and Silas on some missionary work. Eventually, Paul gets tired of his ass, sends him home. And then we also have this association with Mark and Peter. And according to a note from the Papias, a church father, what was it, like 95 AD, common era. This is a guy, this Mark, wrote this gospel, right? Actual tradition says, who knows if it's true, but having a message that's a warning about sending people out on missionary journeys, look at on the fallout on how their hearts become hardened afterwards and they turn into, hard hearts is brutal. This is what happened to the Pharaoh in Exodus. God hardens some hearts. This is Jesus. Some of his enemies early in Mark have hard hearts. The worst people have hard hearts. And it's a sign of moral bankruptcy and stupidity, right? These two things coming together. So that's the hardened hearts. These guys are in bad shape. They've had a decline. That's the warning. Right? Watch out. And it fits something that somebody with a background in missionary work might have seen. So, and then if it was somebody who's trying to imitate Mark, say they claim they were Mark writing the thing, they might want to put that message. So anyway, I want to move on here, but that's a big part of the message here. Now, what was the lesson about the loaves? They didn't understand that if they had understood, that they would have been able to handle the harsh winds at sea, right? And not have been tortured at the oars, right? Well, the feeding of the 5,000, if you take a look here, or Jesus himself divides the fish, but the bread, Jesus gives it to the 12, puts it before the 12, and they give it to the 5,000, right? And that parallels here. Earlier, Jesus gives the 12, some of them calls them, to a mountaintop, some of those he wants, gives them authority over unclean spirits, calls them to be sent out, which he does later, right? And then in doing so, that permits him to expand the benefits of his ministry, so much so that Herod hears of it, right? Well, similarly, when it comes to feeding the 5,000, the 12 are essential. And this is where you have to go back into chapter 5, because the theme in chapter 5 becomes the importance of belief, the presence of belief in believers on the effect of miracles. In chapter 5, Jesus goes to his hometown, actually in the scene just before he sends out the 12. He's in his hometown, and he can do very few deeds there, works of miracles, because the people there stumble at him and lack faith, don't believe. So they see him as, that's Joseph's son, the carpenter. It's this guy trying to be all wise in the temple. They stumble at him, it says. He can do miracles. Similarly, in the scene before that, when Jesus goes to raise priest Jairus' daughter from the dead, he's got to put everybody else out except for his three most trusted disciples, Peter, James, and John. Those guys believe in Jesus a lot, right? And so they could be in there, and it helps. And he's able to do the miracle, raise a girl from the dead, arguably. Maybe she was just sleeping. He said she was sleeping. But in any case, that given that lesson from before, you look at the feeding of the 5,000, the disciples' role in the middle of the distribution of the bread, paralleling their role in the middle of the distribution of the benefit of Jesus' ministry, spreading the word, doing the miracles. There's a parallel there. And if they had understood the power of their own faith affecting this miracle, the feeding of the 5,000, then they would have understood about the loaves, and that understanding they could have used to embolden themselves and fight the sea. They would have been able to strain at the oars, torture themselves in the oars, fight through it, because they knew their own faith was powerful enough, because they learned they helped Jesus feed 5,000 people, right? They helped Jesus expand his ministries where 5,000 people like chased him down to the desert, right? They're not understanding about the loaves, the power of their ability to, and this is no arbitrary thing or two, because Jesus really clear at the aforementioned scene at the temple where he curses the fig tree. After the disciples point out to him that the fig tree withers, he doesn't say anything about the fig tree. He just says, have faith in God, and if you believe that a mountain will be thrown into the sea, it will be done for you. And he goes on to say a little more, and that's the emphasis is on, very clearly, power of your own faith. And say belief in me, says belief in God. So now they have belief in Jesus, which is tied in with God, the Son of God. But he's trying to direct them to, right, not depend on him, right? When he's first he crossing, seeing he's asleep and they can't handle the storm and the waves and the wind, right? They had to wake him up. Now this one he's not there. He's trying to get them to do it on their own, without him. Right? That's what's going on. Jesus is not like everything's through him, like in the Gospel of John, not in Mark. He's trying to lead them to their own, their own power in his absence. So, very, very, very interesting. Fortunately, their hearts were hardened. They missed the message. But you can see what's going on here. Right? All fits, lines up very well. Now, we're going to keep going. Peter, the 4,000. Before we get there, there's an encounter with the Pharisees and some scribes from Jerusalem. They over hand washing, and then there's a Greek lady. Oh yeah, one of the best scenes, the Greek lady. Pharisees and scribe over hand washing. They give Jesus' disciples some crap. Says their hands, they're eating unclean. Jesus responds to these guys is like, like Isaiah said, you honor me with your lips, but your hearts are far from me. And he has a few things to say, but ultimately what he's saying, hey, it's what comes out of your mouth that makes you unclean, not what goes into your mouth. You just crap out into the sewer. And then the disciples ask him to explain in private, and he says, out of men's hearts comes 12 evil thoughts, intentions, right? At least 12 evil thoughts. And among them there's lust, jealousy, wickedness, licentiousness, and 12. All right. Anyway, these Pharisees and scribes were getting on Jesus' nerves, so he takes off, goes to Tyre and Sidon, up the coast away from where he'd been active, right? Doesn't want anybody to see him, nobody to find him. But this darn Greek lady hears he's in town, sniffs him out, finds him out, gets on her hands and knees, say, you got to heal my daughter, she's got a demon. Jesus, he's a little exasperated, tired. He finds me, and he'd already flirted with going into the Gentile territory earlier. Didn't go well, as he said about a legion of demons into a flock of pigs who jumped off a cliff, and then the Greeks were all upset because they killed their pigs. But he says, this lady, he's like, it's like, it wouldn't, be right. First, he's got to feed the children. Wouldn't be right to throw it to the little dogs, right? Throw the little children's food to the little dogs. Children being the Israelites, Jews, and the little dogs being the Greeks, like her, right? So maybe, arguably, an ethnic slur, right? Dogs. Maybe a tip of his cap at the cynics who were dogs. Socrates liked to say, by the dog. But anyway, he calls her a little dog. She one-ups him. She comes back and says to him, even the little dogs eat the crumbs that fall from the children's table. Right? And Jesus loves this. So, for your answer, go home. The demon has left your daughter. Right? Which, if you've been paying attention to what I've been saying here about the power of belief in effective miracles, might leave one wondering if the lady's belief or faith is why the demons left her daughter when she gets home. If it was because Jesus convinced her that was going to be the case, or if he just really did it from a distance. We'll never know. But in any case, this whole scene changes Jesus' mind because he goes into Gentile territory now, Greek territory. And we get some clues for this by where he goes. But really, it's this feeding of the 4,000 here, which they repeats the 5,000. Scholars of the law have wondered, why did he repeat the miracle? Why the 5,000 and the 4,000? And in this case, they have 7 loaves, few fish, undetermined amount, not a lot of fish. The 12 distribute them all. Here, Jesus, actually, before he distributes the bread, he looks up to the heavens and then breaks it. So it's a nice little, blesses the bread and breaks it, right? So nice little touch. I think he does that here. In any case, afterwards, there's 7 baskets of leftovers. Right? And this word for basket is a different word than I mentioned earlier, right? And 7 loaves. So another successful feeding miracle. And it's interesting, before this miracle, these people, they've been out in the desert now for 3 days, and Jesus recommends feeding them because he's worried they're going to faint on the way home. Now you notice that wasn't the case here. They just come out, but 3 days they've been out in the desert with Jesus, and he's like really concerned. So there's an unreasonable request. You got to send them away. These guys are going to die, right? And then there's a reasonable request, like, all right, 3 days, right? That's enough. We got to worry about these people's health, right? And Jesus says that, and the 12 are like, well, how could we feed so many in the desert, right? Like they forgot about this. So they're acting weird. Miracle goes down. The disciples themselves, this time, they distribute the loaves and the fish, and then there's 7 baskets, right, of leftovers. So there's success. And then the very next scene, more Pharisees, and this time the Pharisees want a sign. Give us a sign. Pharisees want a sign. Sorry about that. Yeah, close enough. See, these guys usually want a sign. He's already doing all these miracles everywhere. They want a sign, a little special sign just for them. Jesus tells them, no, there'll be no sign for this generation. Sighs deeply in the spirit. These guys are irritating them. And then the very next scene, you get they're on the boat, the 12 and Jesus, and a bunch of people on the boat, And there's only 1 loaf left on the boat, the narrator tells us. And then Jesus tells them, nowhere seemingly, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and Herod, right? The 12 are like, why is he saying that? Like, they know they're getting that, saying something, we're doing something that's like, whoa, what was it? And then they say, is it because we have no bread? And Jesus loses it. It's like, why are you still talking about bread? Are you blind? You have ears, but not hear? Do you have eyes but do not see? Are your hearts hardened or hearts again? Then he asked them, how many baskets of broken pieces of fish and bread did you pick up after the feeding of the 5,000? They say 12. So how many baskets after the feeding of the 4,000? 7. Both times using that specific word for baskets, by the way. And they know the numbers. They reply, and then he says to them, "Do you not understand?" No, they don't. And as readers, we should be like probably not understanding at the very first, at least, like what's he talking about, right? There's some significance, he seems seemingly, of the number of baskets left over. They remember the number, but they don't get the significance. It's not obvious what the significance is and how it would contribute to the understanding, right? And then you'd have a further problem if you already hadn't done the work here, right? Fortunately for us, we already have cracked this part, thanks to yours truly, my brilliant scholarly work, exegetical work. We know what happened. Their hearts were hardened. They didn't understand about the loaves because they didn't get the message here. They didn't understand their own faith, their own power. They are responsible in part for this feeding miracle. This impressive, right? Feeding 5,000 people with 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, right? Jesus distributed the fish, but they did the loaves, at least partial, in part, large part. They needed to understand that. So we got that. And that same goes here, right? But what about the numbers? What about the numbers? Well, like I said, there's reason to think he moved to the Gentile territory inherited for geographical reasons. But aside from that, these numbers are thought to represent Jewish numbers, if you will, in the Bible. 12 tribes of Israel. You got the 5 books of Moses, right? Here you got 4,000 and 4 and 7, 4 being, 4 winds, 4 corners of the earth, universal theme, 7, 11 loaves, 7 baskets, referring to the 7 days of creation, right? So a lot more work to be done on that, establishing that. Unfortunately, I don't have the same library access I used to. There's one as a footnote in a book, Sowing the Gospel, where the idea seems to be when the story Jesus actually refers to earlier in Mark at with the bread of presence and king, when David comes in and he asks for 5 loaves, and the priest gives them 5 of the 12 loaves of the bread of presence. That those 5 were given for the Jews, the rest of the 7 was for the Gentiles. I don't know about that. However, there's enough indication this feeding miracle represents extending the ministry to the Gentiles, and hence the whole world, going global. This represents the initial Jewish ministry, which is what he was doing at the time. He hadn't extended his ministry yet. We'd already seen that what happened when he tried earlier didn't go well, right? And then the Greek lady represents the transition. So the moral of the story, bottom line right here, 11 of the Pharisees and Herod. First off, we've already seen 11 of Herod with how they act here. It's also 11 of the Pharisees. This is Peter Grimes' insight, really. Never seen any other scholar make the suggestion, and it fits. The scene here, the Pharisees asked for a sign, and after the feeding of the 4,000, they asked for a sign, as Pierre would say, just for them. They want a private sign just for them, even though Jesus has been doing miracles all over the country, right? And then the very next scene, the text just says there's 1 loaf of bread, and then Jesus gives them this warning, 11, beware of the 11 of the Pharisees of Herod. Pierre's suggestion, they're looking at that 1 loaf of bread, they're thinking, oh, hey, how about a miracle just for us, right? A little feeding miracle just for us, a private one. And I think this is ingenious. And this sense of privilege, of entitlement that these Pharisees have, right? That's the fear, the leaven, right? Which goes along with this worldliness, right? Which these guys have not built themselves up like John the Baptist disciples who've been with him living an ascetic lifestyle in the desert. Instead, they've been going around getting handouts and food, and they're not living luxuriously. But they're not as well trained. They haven't been really trained as ascetics. Instead, they're like kind of learn on the fly. And I think there's this warning here, right? To maybe keep an eye on your young missionaries. Make sure they've got the endurance and the training necessary and the development of character to be able to handle this lifestyle without getting to their head and making them act like selfish jerks. So, yeah, 11 of the Pharisees and Herod, the 12 are in trouble. Hardened hearts here because of that leaven, and we'll see it grows to a bigger problem coming up, because what you get after this is Jesus asks the 12 who they are, who they think everybody thinks he is, right? Peter says, "I know who you are. You're the Christ." Right? Greek word for Messiah, anointed one, or meant to come for a new marker. So, yeah, he's the Christ. And Jesus is like, "Shh, don't tell anybody that." And then right after that, Jesus begins to describe how it's necessary for him to die. The Son of Man must be rejected by the elder scribes, chief priests, right? He must be killed in 3 days. He will rise. First, death and resurrection, that prediction. Death and resurrection. Interesting enough, these guys were here 3 days, feeding of the 4,000, right? 3 days in the desert, need to eat 3 days. So, don't know why. It's very consistent with the use of numbers. Invites reflection. Resurrection. Oh. The rising of the dead. Rising. I like that better. Up. He predicts it right here. Peter, losing his shit, begins to rebuke Jesus for saying this, right? And Jesus is like, "You know who you are, Peter? You're Satan." Now, this is brutal. He already hit him with the hard hearts earlier, which is bad enough, comparing it to Jesus' enemies and the freaking Pharaoh, right? He wouldn't let the Jews go. Satan, though. This is like the Prince of Darkness. Now, this wasn't like a cute, clever name. People weren't naming their dog Satan, like back then, first history of Palestine, right? This is like serious stuff. And he says, "You have your mind on the things of men, not God," right? And this reflects Peter's understanding of Jesus as the Christ, the Messiah, the Anointed One, because the common understanding was like the political Messiah that was going to come and reestablish the kingdom of Israel, be the leader, be the king, and that would make Peter like his top guy. He's going to be like his hand. He's going to be like Tywin Lannister or Otto Hightower, right? It's going to be, he's going to get lands and, like Riley used to say at Claremont, he's thinking about his house and his boat, nice boat, right? He's gonna material benefits, right, and power, right? Those are the things of men, right? Satan, right? Now we're seeing this leaven of Herod, right? This whole time when Peter's like, "Who's Jesus? What is this guy? What is it? Christ? He's a Messiah. Guess what that means for me, right? And guys, we're gonna be rich, we're powerful, part of the new kingdom established of Israel. We're gonna be in the inner circle, right?" No. Jesus says, no, I'm going to die. Guess what? I'm going to get rejected and died and killed and then be resurrected. But they're not hearing the resurrected part, right? This is bad news. Whoa, right? And then Jesus rebukes him. And then not only does he rebuke him, he looks around at everybody and he delivers this little speech called the Way of the Cross, right? Where he says that those who want to be his disciples need to take up their cross and follow him. Anybody who would save your life would lose it. The word for life is the same word for soul. So if you really think if you look at what he's saying, he's using a kind of play on words. He said those who want to save their life would lose their soul, right? And he says that those who deny him, the Son of Man will also deny before the holy angels. which is an interesting passage he lifted from the Q source behind all these Gospels, Q, which we'll discuss someday. Unequivocal, way of the cross. This is what my followers are going to do. Not only am I going to suffer and die, you motherfuckers are going to do it too, or I'm going to disown you. How you like me now? All right? Brutal. So, what happened? Why did things turn this way? Why would Jesus predict this here? Why do it now? And then extend it to everybody. Not only am I going to do it, y'all. All right, and this is where we're going to get a little more speculative. Reading Mark here. Is there a reason to connect these feeding miracles with this? Right? Or should we just cut it off? Right? New section after this. Well, we've already seen the leaven and the Herod and Pharisees playing out here with Peter, right? The leaven's growing, baby. Aside from that, the Last Supper, right, is another, involves Jesus having giving bread to his disciples and saying things and establishing this ritual there to follow after his death that's closely associated with his death, that's also associated with this new covenant. Right? That's what he wants to establish. He calls the wine they drink, this is the blood of the new covenant, right? And this is my body, and breaks it, and they eat it, and this becomes this ritual after he dies. It's core to early Christianity and contemporary Christianity, but it was Christianity really in the first few hundred years. These guys were really into the Eucharist, man, and its mysteries shall not be thoroughly unpacked here. However, there's an association of it with his martyrdom. There is, I think, an expectation for those participating in this, drinking from the same cup he drinketh, right? When he tells James and John that, ask them if they could drink from the cup he's going to drink and be baptized with the baptism he's baptized with. He's referring to his death, having people drink from the cup, eat his body, his broken body. Seems to be, at least in part, a pledge to do the same. Follow the way of the cross. Die for Jesus. The good news, the gospel, this whole way of life. The way, it's called an act, right? Should be called upon. So yeah, very interesting. So, where did Jesus get this idea? Why did he want to predict his death now? What's going on? Well, he already knows that there's a plot to kill him already as soon as chapter 2, right? John the Baptist has been killed. He makes a comment earlier about the bridegroom being taken away one day, himself being the bridegroom, right? So the writing's on the wall. As long as he keeps challenging authorities, doing and saying what he intends to do, they're going to get him anyway. Very clear with what happened to John the Baptist. So the days are numbered unless he stops doing what he's doing, which doesn't look like he's going to, right? So fate accompli. He sees us coming, right? So he's got time to reflect. And after extending his ministry, going global, right, having that vision, right, beyond just being a Jewish thing, this movement, this is going to be the whole world, right? They can all partake in the new covenant. All right, what am I going to do? Well, at this point, all right, he makes his prediction. And one of the motivating factors, I think, reading into the text here, we already saw Herod attributed this activity, the success of this missionary, to John the Baptist's death. And it's a reasonable thing, to think that a martyrdom might affect, the movement or similar movements. At the time, being a martyr is often galvanizing, movements for people that follow those movements after they die. Great example of Socrates. In fact, that when Jesus referred to his own martyrdom as a cup, some scholars, including my guys at Claremont, think it's a tacit reference to the cup Socrates drank, hemlock, for his famous martyrdom, which really set a standard in a whole number of, for like the brave heroic death, right? You don't back down from your principles, you die heroically. And there's a number of philosophers and political leaders and figures who had heroic deaths that were greatly admired. And, so it's no great surprise to see if John the Baptist died and Jesus saw a boon to his ministry, right? Like, it would be natural for him to conclude, oh yeah, John's martyrdom had an effect. And as a matter of fact, the feeding of the 5,000 people follow into the desert. Now, certainly part of that is because of this, right? The 12 expanding Jesus' ministry, 13 guys going out there instead of one, right? Gets Herod's attention. However, Jesus calculated that. He knew what he was doing. He's still blown away. And it's reasonable to conclude he thought part of that was response to John's death. It had an influence. It was a boon to Jesus' own ministry. So I'm going to suggest. So in that regard, Jesus and Herod have a little similar. They see this stuff taken off, right, in terms of John the Baptist rising from the dead in some unspecified way. And in fact, you might go further. Matthew puts this feeding of the 5,000, this retreat to the desert, as a response to John's death. And so it could even be 3 days later, after John died, things move on. Perhaps, right? But which would influence 3 days here. Maybe not. But yeah, John the Baptist's death influences Jesus' own thinking about his death. Wants it to have a great impact, and what he wants, right? We find out is this new covenant, which we'll get to in a minute. So what was he thinking? How's this work? Now this is where Orthodox Christians might talk about substitutionary penal atonement theory, right? That Jesus had to offer himself as a perfect sacrifice because mankind was doomed due to the fall of Adam, and they tried to make up for it with animal sacrifices. That wasn't enough. What they needed was the Son of God, a perfect, sinless Son of God to be sacrificed, and that would appease God's wrath, or maybe in a gentler version, meet the requirements of justice for God. And that's the story. And I'm here to tell you that's hogwash. It's based on a poor misunderstanding of the nature of the sacrificial system, where the sacrifices were a gift, all about repentance. Furthermore, you just don't need to go there. Now, Jesus did say, he calls his death, Mark 10:45, he says that he came to give his life as a ransom for many. Mark 10:45. My grandma in her Bible had that passage like underlined and said, key passage in Mark. And she's wrong. This is a key passage in Mark. That one, and then Mark 9:5. And the ones around it. That was my favorite. That's my birthday, by the way. Good passage. This one, we already saw. Way more important. But 10:45, Jesus does say he gave to give his life as a ransom for many. And there's a simple way of understanding that there's this slavery. When you pay a ransom, where do you pay when you want to free someone from slavery, buy their freedom? You ransom them. And there's this metaphor, sin and slavery, right? And this goes, the philosophers did this, goes back to Socrates, further, where they compare, I should say. desires for, excessive food and drink and sex and earthly wanton, lustful desires, power and such, all these bad things. They're called like slavish desires. They're compared to slaves. And Socrates says that number of places. And then it gets picked up on by a number of philosophers, and it comes into the New Testament as well. Number of places, but probably one of the clearest. The one I'm going to give you is Romans 6:16. Do you not know that if you present yourselves to anyone as obedient slaves, you are slaves of the one whom you obey, either of sin, which leads to death, or of obedience, which leads to righteousness. But thanks to God, you having once been slaves of sin, have become obedient from the heart to the form of teaching to which you were entrusted, and that you, having been set free from sin, have become slaves of righteousness. And then Paul goes on to say, I am speaking in human terms because of your natural limitations. Such an arrogant little fucker. And he's trying to really get these guys support too, right? Like Romans, but yeah. Anyway, slaves of sin. So he's purchasing them, right? He wants to purchase them, right? So they're no longer slaves of sin, right? So how's that work? Right? I know he's gonna die. So Jesus knows he's gonna die. Fate accompli, like I say. So wants to have maximum impact. And in Mark, interesting here, Mark, it's structured this way. The midpoint here, we get the transfiguration on the mountaintop. Right here, where Jesus takes Peter, James, and John up to the mountaintop. The divine light emanates from his body so that his garments are whiter than any laundry person could ever bleach them. And then Moses and Elijah come out of that light, and there's a conversation. Peter interrupts, says, it's good to be here. It's good to be here. It's well that we're here. And he wants to erect 3 tabernacles. Shelters used to house the glory of the Lord in the Old Testament. And one for Moses, one for Jesus, one for Elijah. And then after he says this, a cloud comes, says, this is my son, listen to him. Presumably talking about Jesus, right? Maybe about Peter, about the tabernacle. It's not clear. It does say this is kind of Peter said this tabernacle things he didn't know what to say. So it's not like it was a thoughtful comment. On the other hand, later on it says, hey man, it's not you who speaks, it's the Holy Spirit who speaks, right? And when push comes to shove, so maybe there's something to it. I don't know, Pierre like to make a fuss about the 3 tabernacles. And it would be a way to memorialize this beautiful experience. It comes in the middle of Mark. Also might suggest other things, which I cannot talk about. They're secrets. Shh. But we're right here, so when Jesus makes his death prediction, right, and then he makes another one, and then he makes one here where he announces he's going to Jerusalem. Gets more and more specific as time goes on, but what's interesting, this takes place, it looks like at Mount Hermon, right outside of Caesar Philippi, which is at the northernmost point of the kingdom of Israel. And the suggestion seemed to be that, right, because Jesus he's already declared all foods clean, right? what's he got left really tied to Judaism? You know, why not just let it go? And that would be symbolically leaving the kingdom of Israel, would be symbolically recognizing that. And just go do your own thing with the parables. Maybe use the Old Testament for, as a source of inspiration and wisdom, but not just leave the whole scene altogether. Well, instead, after this experience and this conversation with Moses and Elijah that gets interrupted by Peter, the conversation does not get finished. Peter interrupts. Jesus goes to Jerusalem, and then you know what happens. All right, so that's the outcome of this experience, is right in the midpoint of Mark. Okay? So, now one thing this experience does, it's way of the cross, right? Peter, he's like, what the hell? I thought I was going to be the king, the hand of the king of the Messiah, and instead I got to follow him and die. Well, Jesus wants to cheer Peter up, so he takes him up here and he gives him a glimpse of this. This is a visionary experience for Peter, James, and John. And they see this luminosity, this light, this otherworldly light, and now they're give him a glimpse. Oh, this is what happens when I die if I'm not a good boy, right? Not enough to get them to perform well here. Right, but later they all end up dying martyrs. Everybody but John, and apparently he, I believe, tried to, and somehow he survived. Martyrdom was something that happened to all of them, like the way of the cross. Eventually they followed, but not in this story. Not while when Jesus dies. None of them follow him to his death. They all run away, we can explore this another time, because this gets very interesting here. But yeah, he cheer him up a little bit, give him a glimpse of that. Later on, he tells them somewhere in here that they'll gain eternal life for their efforts in the age to come, which would be, And James and John remember this. They asked to sit in his glory. So they liked what they saw. So yeah, that's a good timing for that. And if you're gonna tell somebody they gotta die for the cause, give them a glimpse of the divine light that waits for them if they're able to do so. So yeah, what did Jesus want to accomplish with his death? All right. First off, he really wanted to destroy his enemies. Right, especially the leadership in Jerusalem. Right, that's why he goes. He wants to destroy the Jewish leadership, his enemies, ones that are poisoning the Jewish religion. Right, he can't let it go, leave it all. He wants to go down there. He wants to fight for it. Okay, and ultimately, he believes in the God of Israel. I mean, he calls him Abba, and he's got this relationship with him. I don't think he's leaving. I don't think he leaves that. He has a conversation with Moses and Elijah after all, right? So I think as this, and this is where he goes. Now, the story's enemies. So who are his enemies? Who's he really after here? Let's take a look here. Luke, is that my father? Yeah, these guys here. So for Luke, it's these lawyers. Other passages, they're Pharisees, scribes, and Matthew parallels, I believe. Here they're lawyers. Look what he says to them. He says, I'm at Luke 11:47. Woe to you, for you build the tombs of the prophets whom your ancestors killed. So you are witnesses and approve of the deeds of your ancestors, for they killed them. And you build their tombs. Therefore also the wisdom of God said, quote, I will send them prophets and apostles, some of whom they will kill and prosecute. Wisdom of God being apparently a lost work, unless Jesus is quoting his own past words. Wisdom of God. And Anyway, Jesus goes on. He says, the blood of this generation would be charged with the blood of all the prophets shed since the foundation of the world, from the blood of Abel to the blood of Zechariah, who perished between the altar and the sanctuary. But that's like John the Baptist's dad, I believe. He's blaming them for all. It's all on these guys, right? He wants to blame these lawyers, these legal interpreters of the Torah, right? It's probably just another word for scribes or teachers of the law, lawyers. He tells them, woe to you lawyers, for you have taken away the key of knowledge. You did not enter yourselves, and you hindered those who are entering. This word for knowledge here, it's gnosis, right? The gnosis, the Greek word for knowledge that in the Christian sense means the high spiritual knowledge, whether it's a Gnostic Christians, gnosis, not salvation. It's right here. This is a passage that comes out of Q, source for Mark behind all this. And this gnosis is something you enter into. You enter into it, according to Jesus. It's not just something he tells you that. It's experience. Enter into it. Very interesting. Right? So those are the enemies, right? He wants to go to Jerusalem and punish these guys, and this is his plan, right? So there's this tradition of all these, prophets that God sent, right? And they've all just been mistreated, sent away, beaten, killed, right? And that Jesus has a plan here. So he gets confronted in the temple, blessed by the chief priests, scribes, elders, and they're going back and forth. Finally, he tells them a parable. This parable of the tenants, and this man built a vineyard, built a fence around it, wine press, and then he hires these tenants to take care of it. And then when the day comes, he sends a slave to collect his share of the bounty of the grapes, produce of the vineyard. And they seize the slave, beat him, send him away empty-handed. So that owner of the vineyard sends other servants. Some they beat, some they kill, some they send away. And then finally, he's like, the owner's like, you know what? I'm going to spend my son. They'll respect my beloved son, right? And but actually what happens, they say, oh, this is the heir. Come, let us kill him, and the inheritance will be ours. And that's what they do. And Jesus says, what will the owner of the vineyard do? He will come and destroy the tenants and give the vineyard to others. All right, and they recognize the parables told against them. And it's pretty clear. The vineyard being Israel, especially the temple. The owner being God, the tenants being the leadership in Jerusalem. And the prophets are the ones he sent to collect their produce, and they're sending them away, killing them, killing the prophets. And Jesus thinks, hey, if I go there and challenge these guys, and they kill me, a beloved son, right? He's already been told with his baptism, right, in the Transfiguration, that he's a son. Last that voice was talking to Peter. Or maybe both. He's already got reason to think he's the son of God. He's been told that. And surely God will get my back if I go to Jerusalem, challenge these guys, and they kill me. Right? That's how he's going to destroy his enemies. It's his plan. Number 2, we've already talked about down here. He wants a new covenant. Right? Now, all of these Jews had some sort of eschatological, fancy word for end times, right? A big game-changing, some apocalyptic moment where things were going to radically change, right? And they looked to the prophet for these predictions of these events, wanting them to come true, right? And Jesus is no exception to this. And he's really looking at New Covenant. This is Jeremiah 31. 34. New Covenant, Last Supper, that's what that's all about, the blood of the New Covenant, right? And a way of understanding what he's doing with his death here in pursuit of this New Covenant, right, is through the martyrdom, and specifically the Jewish flavor on martyrdom, which really developed with the Maccabean martyrs, right? There was a revolt against Greek leadership back in the middle of the 2nd century BC, BCE if you prefer. And these priests and Jewish leaders were tortured brutally and killed because they wouldn't eat a little pork, right? And the way they treated their martyrdoms was they asked for that it would be redemptive. When the priest Eleazar is being in fourth Maccabees is being tortured and dying in torment, he pleads to God, let my suffering be a ransom for them, or redemptive for them, atonement for them. I forget the exact words, I'm paraphrasing. But and then he also seeks to, an example of righteousness to inspire others to the Torah, right? And but it's a petition to God, and really what they're doing, if you read the Old Testament, when the leaders of the people of Israel sin, it affects future generations, and that the future generations knew they need to endure, bear that suffering in righteousness, and then eventually the tide will turn and God will reward them and reward future generations, right? So the suffering, right, it's deserved, it's to be endured, and it's purifying if you can do so. And what these martyrs are doing, including Jesus, right, and they're trying to take it on to them, like, right, and then eventually get the redemption, the renewal, in Jesus' case, he wants the new covenant. So what's the new covenant? Jeremiah 31, 34. It's a really nice idea. Yeah, might as well stop at Isaiah here. So, like, for example, the suffering servant, the idea being Jesus taking on the role of the suffering servant, which can be interpreted as referring to Israel as a whole. But Jesus takes it on himself. And so, you see here, 53:12, Isaiah, therefore I will allot him a portion with the great, and he shall divide the spoil with the strong, because he poured out himself to death and was numbered with the transgressors, yet he bore the sin of many and made intercession for the transgressors, right? Intercession, right? There's like a intercession, please God, right? I intercede on their behalf. Forgive them, they know not what they do. That's what he's doing there. And what he wants, Jeremiah 31:34, for the day is surely coming, I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. It will be not like the covenant I made with their ancestors when I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt. Covenant they broke. No. What it is, this covenant I will make with the house of Israel after those days, right? And I will put my law within them, and I will write it on their hearts, and I will be their Lord, and they shall be my people. No longer shall they teach one another or say to one another, know the Lord, for they shall all know me, right? From the least of them to the greatest. I shall forgive their iniquity and remember their sin no more. Right? That's what Jesus wants, this new covenant. Where he's getting rid of the law, really. He's bypassing the law. And this is what you see Paul talking about in Romans, which I told you, read it. It's interesting. The law is like training wheels, right? But now you got the Holy Spirit and Christ and all this. You don't need the law anymore because it's purified their conscience, constantly purifying our conscience, right? And we don't need the law. We got the law in our hearts, right? And his hearts have been circumcised. And that's Paul's favorite metaphor. And so yeah, new covenant, law written on the hearts. Probably he's looking at what Joel 2:20, chapter 2, 28, 32, where God says he's going to pour out his spirit on all flesh, right? And this is what the petition, right? I'm going to be faithful, go to Israel, go to Jerusalem, defend your temple, right? Clear your temple, and you're going to reward me by destroying the temple and giving it to the Romans. I don't know if he meant it quite that way, but you're going to reward me by destroying my enemies, and we're going to do a new covenant. And what he wants, as we saw earlier, to go global, right? Not just the Jews, right? Everybody, because it's a new covenant. You don't need to worry about circumcisions in the Torah. It's going right into men's hearts, right? And that's what what he was after. So, lastly, way of the cross. Why did Jesus and Mark, anyway, if not real life, probably real life, I don't know. Why did he demand this of him? Why wasn't it enough just for him to die? In Hebrews, the author of Hebrews, they say, hey, you know what? Jesus died because the new covenant, and covenant requires a sacrifice, because Moses and Abraham did a sacrifice when they made their covenant. Abraham had the covenant of circumcision. Moses the covenant of the law, right? And they're doing sacrifices. But Jesus, for this covenant, such a big deal, it had to be like the ultimate sacrifice, right? But the good thing is they only had to do it once, right? Whereas the priests before, they had to sacrifice a bunch of animals over and over. Now only one time. Now this whole answer in Hebrews about why the need for Jesus to die, because it's a covenant, got to have a sacrifice. Those are the rules. It doesn't really hold up. But you can see why Jesus, associated his death with this new covenant, blood of the covenant. They're trying to make sense of it. From the beginning, it is not easy, even though I claim to have unpacked it. In any case, I'm going to talk briefly the way of the cross. Why did he demand his disciples all follow the way of the cross? Why must they be ready to suffer and die? As we already saw, 12, Jesus, 12, right, 5,000, and Jesus, 12, 4,000, right? He's able to, symbolically, how Jesus is able to, through his disciples, spread the benefits of his ministry, right? Symbolized by the multiplication of the loaves, right? More people doing it, 13 people going to spread more than one, right? But then we also saw with John the Baptist that his martyrdom had an effect on Jesus' ministry, perhaps. The reason for thinking that. And you combine these two ideas here and with the way of the cross, and what you get, multiplication of the martyrs. Well, Jesus' martyrdom will be a big deal, and hopefully he'll get this new covenant, right? And but if this thing's really going to take off in a global way, you need this. You need an army of martyrs, right? An army of martyrs inspiring people, right? Showing bravery in the face of death, and without this, there is no Christianity into the 3rd century, probably. Certainly, you're not going to get the kind of success you had, because what happens in Greco-Roman culture, especially, you're brave in the face of death. That's impressive. They admired that. That's what their heroes did, right? And Christians did really well in this regard. The Greeks and Romans, they liked other stuff about Christianity. His teaching, the parables, the pithy, right, kind of common sense, distilled, accessible, many, vignettes of wisdom. They liked that. They liked the love. They liked the ethics. They liked all that stuff. The meals, whatever was going on there was working. There was charismatic activity, no doubt, especially in the early days. But they really were impressed with this. And we know this because we got some writings that express just this. Tertullian, writing at the end of the second century, church father, he's discussing all these Christians that have been martyred, and what he has to say when he's like addressing those persecutors. Says, whatever your cruelty, the next more exquisite from the last, it profits you nothing. It is greater bait to our school. We become more numerous as often as we are measured by you. The blood of Christians is seed, right? And he goes on, and he says, like, look, many of you exhort to tolerance of pain and death, like Cicero in this Tusculanus, like Seneca, like Diogenes, like Pyrrhon, like Callisnius, right? Naming all these famous Romans who died brave deaths. And it goes on, and yet their words do not find so many disciples as Christians do by teaching and deeds. And then the author here, Riley, goes on, and he explains the Christians were beating the Romans at their own game. Christians were, of course, Romans themselves of every stripe and subset of the empire. Both sides shared the same ideals and culture. The philosophers named were among the most influential of Greece and Rome, who had taught the philosophical basis for the athletic and military ideals of the heroes, right? And yet it was the Christians, not the philosophers, who were actually able to achieve those ideals and spread them among the common people, right? Not only did they achieve those ideals, it's commoners. Christianity was a religion of commoners. You didn't have to get into like an elite academy, a lot of money. It was a religion for the commoners. Jesus' teachings, right? They're not. Now the Gospels themselves are really deep and profound and require all kinds of education to understand. The little parables that you find in the early writings, some are more difficult than others, but they were accessible. And the multiplication of the martyrs. That's where it ends up. That's the secret ingredient to the spread of Jesus movement, Christianity, the way of the cross. Now, I want to close with one more thing. Alternative possibility. Imagine if the Romans didn't occupy this whole area, and there wasn't all this tension between the Jews and the Romans, and the Jews were more tolerant of Christians and Jesus, with all this tension and power struggle. How Christianity might have grown instead. This right here is a river. It's called the Euphrates. Have you heard of it? Little town right here. Edessa. Called something else now. It's all in Turkey now, actually. Edessa. Now we have over here Antioch, maybe. Coast, right? Jerusalem. Sea of Galilee. Mount Hermon, Transfiguration takes place. This map is precisely to scale, folks. So, take it to the bank. Hardly. But what I want to demonstrate with this is the Roman Empire ended right here. They occupied all this and then all the way over here. They occupied all that. Big empire, but it ended at the Euphrates at this point in the early days of Christianity. There was no war except for a brief period, but up until somewhere in the middle of the second century, if not later, which my history better, this was a free war, peaceful place, a trading town. And as a result, the type of Christianity that developed there, this way of the cross didn't matter. Nobody's being persecuted. If nobody's persecuting you, then what do you do if you're a Christian? Well, what you do, you focus instead on the wisdom of Jesus. Remember, it wasn't just the way of the cross. Jesus is a teacher of parables. right? You got all these wisdom sayings, right? The keys to gnosis, right? You enter some experience you enter into, right? There's kinds of interesting wisdom sayings in the Gospels, this tradition, and it really gets developed most profoundly in the Gospel of Thomas. Thomas, which is actually the Aramaic word for twin, gets turned into, they put an S on it and turned to a Greek name. The twin of Jesus. And his book, the Jesus is just Jesus. He's not the Christ. He doesn't, just Jesus says. And when it comes to his identity, you get an interesting answer. Not the normal one you get from Peter. I'm not going to cover it now. Check it out. You also don't have this, the way of the cross, like I said. And it even pisses on the prophets a little bit. Right? So it's maybe what would have happened if Jesus, when he was here at the top of the kingdom of Israel, if he just kept on going, left all that behind. That's what you get, Thomas, right? If he'd carried on, you get Thomas. Instead, he went to Jerusalem, died the way of the cross. But this survived well enough, the wisdom, to develop. It started here. Eventually, this movement moved out here, settled in Odessa, and this is preserved and developed a wisdom tradition where the goal is to understand and discover the meaning of Jesus' words and to have an experience where one encounters one's heavenly twin, higher self, which is all one in the image of God. And that's the goal here, not that. Right? So this gets preserved, and there's evidence that this kind of thought was present in Corinth, and that Paul was writing in response to a new teacher who'd come to Corinth teaching some Thomas-type lessons. And it's interesting, Paul doesn't say they're wrong. He just says, yeah, I didn't teach you that stuff because you weren't mature enough to understand all it. I give you milk, you know. You're not a spiritual. You're not a pneumatico. You're a fleshly. What's the word? Soulless. The soul is lower than spirit. Anyway, he criticizes him, but he doesn't criticize the teaching for Thomas, curiously enough. He seems to indicate he does his own thing with people that are ready for it, so, for what it's worth. But when you're in this kind of situation, Roman Empire, all this conflict, right? The way the cross becomes important. So that's the way Christianity developed, the way it started, the way Jesus took it by going to Jerusalem and choosing to challenge the authorities and egg them on to kill him. And there you have it. I think I've said my piece. Thanks for paying attention if you're still there. I encourage you to explore these mysteries on your own. And maybe we'll do more videos in the future. Love to hear from you in the comments, and take care.